Joining me now is Sam Nunberg, former political advisor to the president before and then again during the 2016 campaign. Let's talk about the culture of backstabbing at the White House. You have Omarosa making tapes, or just backstabbing in Donald Trump's inner circle. You have Michael Cohen making tapes. You have people, 24 people, talking to the Washington Post on any given day about what's going on in the White House. Does the fish rot from the head here?
Well, look, I must have been naive. I never taped. I never recorded. And in fact, when I had a conversation recorded that was played back to the president, I said to him, you have no problem that I was taped? And he had no problem with it.
Is the president taping people?
I don't know.
You had told me, though, that you believe that you were warned by folks, hey, if you walk into Donald Trump's office before he was president, he might be taping you.
Yeah, I've been warned. I've been warned by people outside of the Trump organization. In New York culture, it's known that he likes to tape as well.
Why would he do that?
Lots of business people do, Katie. This is not something that's not done in New York, in real estate, in other kinds of businesses too. Wall Street, lawyers. It's a one-party consent state.
Is that why Omarosa or Michael Cohen would be taping him?
Omarosa, I think Michael did not tape Donald Trump maliciously, I don't believe. I think Michael taped Donald Trump to memorialize his relationship so that he could 5 years from now, so that he could 8 years from now, or even can play it off the record to someone and say...
But he's also taping conversations with journalists, so is it to memorialize conversations he's having...
No, well, what I mean with Michael is Michael never taped Donald Trump because he was worried about covering himself for legal exposure or something along those lines. I don't believe that. I think Omarosa is Omarosa. I think you'd be careful around her.
But it could also be, and this is the way that people describe the president. He is loyal to you for as long as he needs you. You've had firsthand experience with
this. Yes, I have.
And he expects and demands loyalty back. But when he decides he doesn't need you any longer, you're cut loose. You're nothing to him. So this culture around him of leaking, of covering your own behind, of taping,
right.
Could that be because folks realize that at some point he's going to take the bus and back over them with it? Well,
look, I think in Omarosa's case, I think that she feels, I said to Gabe Sherman in that article, like hell hath no fury like Omarosa scorn. If they wanted her fired or terminated, they handled it in the worst way possible. And this whole idea that, well, she shouldn't have been taping in the stat room or in the national security room, I have no problem with it because I think Kelly mishandled that situation. And then after that, when they told her subsequently, well, we didn't know about it, perhaps they did, perhaps they didn't, it just wasn't the way to handle it with somebody like Omarosa. I think it was a critical mistake. I think that Kelly, by the way, is one of the people that's actually prodding the president to try to arrest her. You think that Kelly is telling the president to tell Jeff Sessions to arrest her? I've heard that from other people. But other than just hearing it from rumor, is that these reliable sources you're hearing it from? Yes. That's a pretty I think that he's one of the people, they think it's a national security violation. In talking about the White House and the culture there, it's not just recording people. You have married couples who are willing to backstab each other, or at least one person who works in the White House. Look at what Kellyanne Conway said about her husband and his tweets, because George Conway has been tweeting a ton about the president, not flattering things. So she's doing an interview with a Washington Post reporter, and the reporter says, "You told me you found your husband George's tweets disrespectful." Conway: "It is disrespectful. It's a violation of basic decency, certainly if not marital vows, as, quote, a person familiar with their relationship." Reporter: "No, we're on the record here. You can't just say after the fact as someone familiar." "I told you everything about his tweets was off the record," she says. Reporter: "No, that's not true. That never happened." Conway: "Well, people do see it this way. People do see it that way. I don't say I do, but people see it that way." Gosh. Reporter: "But I'm saying we never discussed everything about his tweets being off the record. There are certain things you said that I put off the record." Conway: "Fine, I've never actually said what I think about it, and I won't say what I think about it, which tells you what I think about it." She said a moment ago what she thinks about it. What is going on with this White House? Look, I actually think that this is inappropriate. It wasn't fair to her that they even asked her about this. What? She invited them the reporter into her home to do a profile of her. George Conway's tweets are all out there. Of course she is going to be asked about it. I think you say that from your perspective as a reporter. It's a features reporter. It's a reporter talking about their lifestyle. I get it. I think it's a difficult situation.
I don't know what goes on.
Regardless of what you think of it, what about Kellyanne Conway saying something derogatory or slagging off her husband and then trying to do it as somebody familiar with their relationship?
Well, I think she's in a very difficult position, too, and that goes within the White House, within the dynamics of the White House. I am sure other people, her adversaries, bring her husband's tweets to the president or make sure that he sees them, and it's just not a fair situation.
But she also she immediately tried to withdraw her remarks with disinformation. How low will people go in this White House?
Look, I like Kellyanne a lot.
Isn't it just an example of the way they behave and what they value?
This is this White House, the minute they've all gone in, though, they have been under a lot of scrutiny, and then you have this independent counsel as well. Now you're looking at me like this. I think that I don't think that she should have done the interview to begin with, or a feature about with her husband in light of the tweets. With that said, it's a difficult position that she's in.
Let's talk about what you're doing now. You're working with Steve Bannon for the midterm elections.
I'm glad we're off all that.
You're trying to save the House for President Trump. And I find it interesting because in the past, you've said some pretty horrible things about the president. You've called him an idiot, an effing fool, a man who's devoid of character.
I never said that one.
Yeah, you did. I'll say it right here from Fire and Fury. Is Trump a good person, an intelligent person, a capable person? Asked Sam Nunberg. I don't even know, but I know he's a star. That's saying he's devoid of character.
No, that means that he was going to get elected president when I saw him the first time.
Why do you want to help a man who you describe that way to win back the House?
Well, first of all, it's I support this presidency. I support his positions, and I think he's been a very good president. With that said as well, this is his first reelect. When you look at the fact that you have Democrats only need to win 24 seats, 25 districts which Hillary Clinton has won. Everybody's forecasting that this will be some kind of blue wave. I don't believe it. We'll see. I think that there are institutional problems, and as we were talking off camera, this goes to whether or not he will be impeached or not. And I think that in terms of that, there are a lot of constitutional issues. There's nullification. And from the point of view of his actions as president, these are issues that I think he can win on.
Is Bannon back in touch with the president?
I don't know.
Sam Nunberg. Sam, always good to see you. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. And tomorrow, Steve Bannon himself speaks exclusively with Ari Melber. That's at 10 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, right here on MSNBC. And ahead, the GOP brings out the heavy artillery, how Republicans are using everything they've got to keep the House.
You're watching MSNBC International.
We made a decision to show this, and we're not showing the White House press briefing. I'd love people to tweet me and tell me whether they think that was the right decision. And there you have history in the making. I can watch that over and over and over and over again. And you know what? It happens so easily that we're tempted to say that stuff's easy. It's not. That is really, really hard. And today we just watched history.
It opens the door to a future of many, many other things we can and will do in space.
5 decades.
A leader determined to resist change.
7 presidents.
Hi, Andrea. How are you?
What would reassure you that the surge is worth it?
Hello, Mr. President.
20 election cycles.
Surrounded by balloons.
1 pursuit.
What about the Russia investigation?
Was there suspicion about Michael Flynn? Doesn't the White House have to take some action? What would be the consequences of
Can you
that?
assure us that Russia will not be able to move further in Ukraine?
It's a divided country, people ready to go toe-to-toe on each and every issue. Look, I like a political fight as much as anybody. But are we going to get to some decisions or just keep fighting?
Learn how you can help provide desks for schools in Malawi at lastworddesks.msnbc.com and watch The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell weeknights on MSNBC.
Welcome back. Today, Meet the Midterms. It's only August, and Republicans are already spending big to try to disqualify Democratic House candidates. Just yesterday, the Congressional Leadership Fund, a super PAC backed by House Republican leaders, released at least 5 different ads hitting Democrats, like this new radio spot against Randy Bryce, who just won the Democratic nomination in Speaker Paul Ryan's Wisconsin district.
We have a drunk driver in custody.
Can we get an ID on him?
His name is Randy Bryce, repeat offender.
9 arrests? Randy Bryce has no business making the laws. He's spent his life breaking the law.
Or this ad against first-time candidate Andy Kim, who's running against New Jersey Republican Congressman Tom MacArthur.
Meet Washington insider Andy Kim. Kim spent his adult life in D.C. In fact, Kim still keeps his home there. Now, Kim wants our congressional seat.
Here's why this matters. Republicans are facing a challenging political environment, and they are not waiting until the fall to throw the kitchen sink at Democrats. This is what you do when you're behind. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. We'll be right back.
You're watching MSNBC International.
We will not be quiet.
This guy's behavior doesn't make any sense.
We will remain resolute.
This doesn't look good, General.
Asking what others aren't asking.
Why would the president want Congress to investigate for information he already has?
And wake up ready to do it again.
Ma, you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, there's Mom.
Yay!
Mom's in Colombia.
I am watching in my front yard.
Mom's talking, and there's the president. President Trump leading by example there. He also wearing the glasses.
Oh, my goodness. You can take it off now. That's why I couldn't see with the glasses on.
Ma, thank you. Thanks for giving us that.
You're welcome.
That first-hand account there from Colombia. Tell everybody hello.
Kids in Need of Desks is a partnership I created with UNICEF to provide desks to schools in Malawi. You have now contributed.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.